Uncover Poirot's Secrets, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot reveals thrilling mysteries. A scream pierces the stillness of Blackthorn Manor, where shadows hide deadly secrets. Who stabbed Charles Haverford with the family's own letter opener? Was it the desperate wife, the scheming solicitor, or the silent niece? As the walls of this grand estate close in, only Hercule Poirot's little gray cells can unravel a web of lies, betrayal, and greed. Will the truth come too late? Dive into a mystery where every clue counts, and no one is what they seem. Chapter 1. The Quiet Before the Storm. The sun dipped low over Blackthorn Manor, casting long shadows across its ivy-draped walls. Nestled in the verdant folds of Devonshire's hills, the estate exuded an air of faded grandeur, its mullioned windows glinting like watchful eyes. The Haverford family, stewards of this ancestral pile for 3 centuries, had long been a name synonymous with quiet wealth, though whispers of financial strain now clung to their legacy. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the steadfast companion of Hercule Poirot, arrived at the manor's oak-paneled doors under a sky streaked with amber, clutching a letter from Lady Eleanor Haverford. Her words had been brief but urgent. "A matter of utmost delicacy requires your presence." Discretion is paramount. Hastings was ushered into the drawing room by a butler whose rigid posture betrayed no hint of the household's unease. The room was a study in opulence, polished mahogany, velvet drapes, and a chandelier that scattered light like diamonds. Yet the atmosphere was heavy, as if the very air held its breath. Lady Eleanor, a formidable woman of 60 with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, greeted Hastings with a nod, her lips pressed into a thin line. She presided over her guests with the poise of one accustomed to command, though her fingers tightened briefly on her cane. The assembled company was small but eclectic. Charles Haverford, Lady Eleanor's only son, cut a striking figure at 35, his handsome features marred by a restless energy. He paced before the fireplace, his dark eyes flickering toward the door as if expecting an unwelcome arrival. His wife Margaret sat on a brocade sofa, her delicate hands folded over an embroidery hoop she had not touched. Her auburn hair was pinned meticulously, but her gaze was distant, her lips pale. Dr. Simon Wells, the family physician, leaned against the mantel, nursing a glass of sherry with an air of distraction, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Clara Denby, Lady Eleanor's orphaned niece, perched on an ottoman, her youthful beauty overshadowed by a nervous habit of twisting her pearl necklace. Completing the circle were Victor Crane, a brusque London solicitor with a penchant for blunt speech, and his wife Beatrice, whose quiet demeanor and darting eyes suggested she was ill at ease in such grand surroundings. Dinner was served in the dining room where candlelight danced on crystal and silver. The conversation, strained beneath a veneer of civility, touched on safe topics: the unseasonable heat, the upcoming village fete, the prospects of rain. Hastings, seated beside Clara, noted the tremor in her hand as she reached for her wineglass. "Is something troubling you, Miss Denby?" he asked, his tone gentle. She offered a brittle smile, her voice barely above a whisper. "Only the heat, Captain. It's oppressive tonight, don't you think?" He nodded, unconvinced, his soldier's instinct sensing undercurrents he could not yet name. Across the table, Charles's laughter rang out, sharp and forced, as he responded to a remark from Victor about London's financial markets. Margaret's eyes remained fixed on her plate, while Lady Eleanor's gaze swept the room like a hawk's, missing nothing. Dr. Wells, usually loquacious, was unusually subdued, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the tablecloth. Beatrice Crane, meanwhile, seemed to shrink into her chair, her responses to her husband's comments monosyllabic. As the clock in the hall chimed 9, a scream tore through the manor, high and piercing, from the direction of the library. The guests froze, forks poised, faces blanching. Hastings was the first to move, his chair scraping as he rose. "Stay calm," he urged, though his pulse quickened. The party surged toward the library, a heavy door of carved oak at the end of a dim corridor. Hastings flung it open, and the sight within stopped him cold. Charles Haverford lay sprawled across a Persian rug, his white shirt stained crimson. A silver letter opener, engraved with the Haverford crest, protruded from his chest. His eyes, wide and sightless, stared at the ceiling, where shadows flickered in the glow of a single lamp. Margaret's cry broke the silence, a wail of anguish as she sank to her knees. Lady Eleanor gripped the doorframe, her face ashen but composed. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Dr. Wells knelt beside the body, his fingers searching futilely for a pulse. "He's dead," Wells said, his voice hollow, as if the words were foreign to him. Hastings took in the scene. The open window, curtains stirring in the night breeze. The desk littered with papers, some scattered on the floor. A glass of brandy untouched beside Charles's hand. The letter opener gleamed wickedly, its purpose grotesquely fulfilled. The room, with its shelves of leather-bound books and faint scent of cigar smoke, seemed to hold its breath, as if guarding the secret of what had transpired. Victor Crane's voice cut through the stunned silence. "We must call the police." Now Hastings nodded, his mind racing. Something about the scene felt wrong, staged. But what? He turned to the butler, who hovered in the doorway. "Telephone the constabulary, and no one is to touch anything." As the household retreated to the drawing room, their faces a gallery of shock, grief, and suspicion, Hastings knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary crime. He sent a telegram to London, to the one man whose meticulous mind could pierce the veil of deception. Hercule Poirot would come, and with him, the truth. Chapter 2. The Crime Discovered. The library of Blackthorn Manor was a tableau of horror, its scholarly calm shattered by the grim spectacle of Charles Haverford's lifeless form. The Persian rug, once a proud centerpiece, was now marred by a spreading stain of crimson that seeped from the wound in Charles's chest. The silver letter opener, its handle engraved with the Haverford crest, gleamed obscenely in the lamplight, a silent witness to the violence that had unfolded. The open window admitted a faint breeze, stirring the heavy curtains while papers lay scattered across the mahogany desk, some fluttering to the floor as if caught in a moment of chaos. A glass of brandy, untouched, stood sentinel beside Charles's outstretched hand, its amber glow catching the light. Captain Arthur Hastings stood in the doorway, his military instincts warring with the shock of the scene. Margaret Haverford's sobs broke the silence, her delicate frame crumpled in a chair as she clutched a handkerchief to her face. Lady Eleanor Haverford, rigid as marble, gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white, her eyes fixed on her son's body with a mixture of grief and something harder to decipher. Dr. Simon Wells, still kneeling beside Charles, rose slowly, his face pale behind his spectacles. "He's gone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder might disturb the dead. Clara Denby stood frozen, her pearl necklace clutched tightly in her hand, her wide eyes reflecting the flickering lamp. Victor Crane, his blunt features set in a scowl, positioned himself by the open window while his wife Beatrice hovered behind him, her hands twisting nervously in the folds of her dress. Hastings took charge, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "Everyone, back to the drawing room. We must leave the scene untouched for the police." He ushered the group out, noting their reactions. Margaret's inconsolable weeping, Clara's stunned silence, Victor's curt nod, and Beatrice's furtive glance toward her husband. Lady Eleanor lingered a moment, her gaze sweeping the room as if memorizing every detail before following with measured steps. In the drawing room, the air was thick with tension. The guests sat in uneasy silence, the clink of a teacup against a saucer sounding unnaturally loud. Hastings surveyed the room, his mind cataloging details. The untouched brandy glass, the open window with no signs of forced entry, the papers scattered in a way that felt oddly deliberate. He crouched by the desk, careful not to touch anything, and noted a torn envelope half hidden beneath a ledger. Its elegant handwriting was addressed to Charles, but the contents were missing. A clue, perhaps, but one that raised more questions than answers. The butler, Mr. Grayson, returned to announce that the police had been summoned. Within the hour, Inspector Harold Grayson, no relation to the butler, arrived from the local constabulary, his dour face and heavy tread announcing his authority. He surveyed the library with a practiced eye, his mustache twitching as he took in the scene. "Looks like a robbery gone wrong," he declared, pointing to the open window. "Some vagrant came in from the garden, stabbed Mr. Haverford, and fled. Mark my words, we'll find the culprit skulking in the village by morning." Hastings frowned, unconvinced. The theory was too tidy, too eager to pin the crime on an outsider. He noted the absence of footprints in the dry soil beneath the window, the undisturbed dust on the sill, the precision of the letter opener's placement. A thief would have taken the silver, the watch still ticking on Charles's wrist, or the gold cigarette case protruding from his pocket. This was no random act. Inspector Grayson questioned the household briefly, his notebook filling with scrawled alibis. Lady Eleanor stated she had last seen Charles at 8:30 p.m., discussing estate matters in the hall. Margaret claimed she had retired early with a headache, leaving Charles in the drawing room. Dr. Wells said he was in his room reading medical journals. Clara admitted to passing the library at 8:45, but insisted she saw nothing amiss. Victor and Beatrice swore they were together in the conservatory discussing a legal matter, though Victor's gruff tone suggested irritation at the question. As the inspector droned on, Hastings' thoughts turned to his friend Hercule Poirot. This crime, with its web of secrets and carefully placed misdirection, demanded a mind sharper than Grayson's. Hastings slipped away to the hall, where the butler permitted him use of the telephone. He sent a telegram to London, brief but urgent. "Murder at Blackthorn Manor. Your presence required. Hastings." Returning to the drawing room, Hastings found the guests in a state of uneasy vigil. Margaret's sobs had quieted, but her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling. Clara stared into the fire, her face a mask of distress. Dr. Wells sipped a fresh glass of sherry, his fingers unsteady. Victor paced, muttering about the incompetence of rural police, while Beatrice sat silently, her eyes darting to the door at every sound. Lady Eleanor, seated in a high-backed chair, watched them all, her expression unreadable. Hastings settled into a corner, his notebook open, jotting down the evening's timeline. 8:30 p.m. Lady Eleanor speaks with Charles in the hall. 8:45 p.m. Clara passes the library, sees nothing. 9 p.m. Scream heard, body discovered. The gap between 8:45 and 9 o'clock was critical. Who had been with Charles in those fateful minutes? And why had the killer chosen a letter opener, a weapon so personal, so close at hand? Hastings' instincts told him the answer lay not in the village, but within these walls, among the polished manners and hidden motives of Blackthorn Manor's inhabitants. As the clock struck midnight, the household waited, the weight of the crime pressing down like the Devonshire mist outside. Poirot would arrive by morning, and with him the promise of clarity. But for now, the shadows held their secrets close. Chapter 3. The arrival of Poirot. The morning train from London pulled into the sleepy Devonshire station with a hiss of steam, and from its first-class carriage stepped Hercule Poirot, immaculate as ever. His patent leather shoes gleamed in the sunlight, his black suit was pressed to perfection, and his mustache, that splendid monument to precision, curled with symmetrical pride. Captain Arthur Hastings awaited him on the platform, his face a mixture of relief and urgency as he recounted the grim events at Blackthorn Manor. Poirot listened, his head tilted slightly, his green eyes sharp as they darted over Hastings' features, as if reading the unspoken as much as the spoken. "Mon ami," Poirot said, adjusting his hat with a delicate touch. "A murder in a grand house such as this is like a crack in a fine porcelain vase. It reveals the flaws beneath the polish. Tell me, what do your instincts say?" Hastings frowned, his honest face creasing. "It's too neat, Poirot. The inspector thinks it's a thief, but the scene feels arranged. The letter opener, the open window, the untouched valuables, it doesn't add up." Poirot's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Bien. You begin to see, Hastings. The truth is never so obliging as to present itself plainly. We shall uncover it with method and order." The drive to Blackthorn Manor was short, the countryside rolling past in a blur of green hills and hedgerows. Upon arrival, Poirot paused at the manor's entrance, his gaze sweeping over the ivy-clad facade, the mullioned windows, the gravel drive unmarred by careless footprints. "A house of secrets," he murmured, "and secrets, mon ami, are the currency of murder." Inside, the household awaited in the drawing room, their faces a gallery of strained politeness and barely concealed nerves. Lady Eleanor Haverford rose to greet Poirot, her bearing regal despite the shadows beneath her eyes. Margaret sat by the window, her embroidery abandoned, her eyes red from weeping. Dr. Simon Wells stood by the fireplace, his spectacles catching the light as he shifted uncomfortably. Clara Denby perched on the edge of a chair, her fingers twisting her pearl necklace until it seemed the strand might snap. Victor Crane, his blunt features set in a scowl, stood apart, while Beatrice, his wife, hovered at his side, her gaze flickering nervously to Poirot. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding, "I am Hercule Poirot, and I have been summoned to unravel the tragedy of Monsieur Charles Haverford's death. A crime such as this is a puzzle, and I assure you I shall solve it. But I require your cooperation. Who last saw Monsieur Charles, and at what time?" The answers came haltingly. Lady Eleanor spoke first, her voice steady. "I spoke with Charles at 8:30 last evening in the hall. We discussed estate matters. He seemed preoccupied." Margaret, her voice trembling, said she had retired to her room at 8:15 with a headache, leaving Charles in the drawing room. Dr. Wells claimed he was in his guest room reading at the time of the murder. Clara admitted to passing the library at 8:45, noticing the door ajar but seeing nothing amiss. Victor and Beatrice insisted they were together in the conservatory from 8:30 to 9, discussing a legal matter, though Victor's gruff tone suggested irritation at the question. Poirot's eyes twinkled as he listened, his small, neat hands clasped behind his back. "Merci. Your accounts are most illuminating. Now I shall examine the scene of the crime." The library was as Hastings had described, its air heavy with the scent of old books and tragedy. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his gaze lingering on every detail. The letter opener still embedded in Charles's chest, its silver handle gleaming. The open window, its curtains undisturbed, the scattered papers on the desk, one corner of a torn envelope peeking from beneath a ledger. He crouched by the body, noting the angle of the wound, precise, deliberate, driven with force. "This was no act of impulse," he murmured. "The killer knew exactly where to strike." He turned to the window, inspecting the sill. No dust disturbed, no footprints in the garden bed below. "The inspector's thief is a phantom, Hastings." His fingers brushed the desk, pausing at the brandy glass. He leaned closer, his nose twitching. "Curieux. A faint trace of something, not brandy. Lipstick, perhaps?" He straightened, his expression unreadable. Poirot then examined the torn envelope, its elegant script addressed to Charles. "A message, perhaps a lure," he said softly. "But where is the note itself? The killer has been careful, or careless." Returning to the drawing room, Poirot addressed the household once more. "This crime, mes amis, is not the work of an outsider. The window is a deception, the letter opener a choice of intimacy. Someone in this house knows more than they say. I, Hercule Poirot, shall find the truth, and it will not hide from my little gray cells." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the guests like a fog. Margaret's hands trembled. Clara's necklace snapped with a faint pop, scattering pearls across the floor, and Victor's scowl deepened. Lady Eleanor met Poirot's gaze, her eyes sharp with something akin to respect or fear. As Poirot and Hastings retired to discuss the case, the detective's voice was low, thoughtful. "The heart of this mystery lies in the people, Hastings. Their lies, their secrets, their silences. We shall observe, we shall listen, and we shall unravel outside." The Devonshire sky was clear, but within Blackthorn Manor a storm of suspicion was gathering, and Poirot stood at its center, calm and unshakable. Chapter 4. The First Interviews. The morning room of Blackthorn Manor, with its tall windows and soft sunlight filtering through lace curtains, seemed an incongruous setting for the grim task at hand. Hercule Poirot had chosen this space for his interviews, its airy calm a deliberate contrast to the oppressive weight of murder. A small table held a silver tray with a teapot and a single cup of tisane, brewed to Poirot's exacting specifications. Captain Arthur Hastings sat nearby, his notebook open ready to record the nuances of each conversation. Poirot, impeccable in his black suit, stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his green eyes sharp as he prepared to probe the hearts and minds of Blackthorn's inhabitants. Lady Eleanor Haverford was the first to be summoned. She entered with the dignity of a queen, her gray hair swept into a severe bun, her cane tapping lightly on the parquet floor. She sat, her posture rigid, and met Poirot's gaze with a steely calm that belied her grief. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice clear but low, "I trust you will find my son's killer swiftly. This house cannot bear further scandal." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, I assure you the truth is my only aim." "Tell me of your son, Charles. What was his state of mind in the days before his death?" Lady Eleanor's lips tightened. Charles was troubled. "The estate, you see, is not what it once was. Debts have accumulated, and Charles, he was reckless with money. Investments, gambling, unwise ventures. We argued often, but he was my son. I loved him." Poirot noted the faint tremor in her hand as she spoke of love. "Did he have enemies, madame? Someone who might wish him harm?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering to the window. "He quarreled with Victor Crane, the solicitor, over a failed business deal. Victor was furious, claimed Charles cost him thousands. But murder? I cannot believe it of anyone here." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Merci, madame. One last question. Where were you at 8:45 last evening?" "I was in my study reviewing accounts," she said firmly. "Alone." Next came Margaret Haverford, her delicate features drawn with exhaustion. She sank into the chair, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief. Poirot's voice softened, but his eyes remained keen. "Madame Haverford, your husband's death is a great tragedy. Tell me, how was your marriage?" Margaret's gaze dropped to her lap. "Charles was distant. He spent hours in the library writing letters, I don't know to whom. He was under strain, always talking of money, of saving the estate." Her voice broke and she dabbed at her eyes. Hastings noticed a faint bruise on her wrist, quickly concealed by her sleeve as she adjusted her shawl. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Letters, you say? Did you ever see them?" No, she whispered. He kept them locked in his desk. I didn't pry. And at 8:45, madame? I was in my room, she said faintly. I had a headache and retired early. Dr. Simon Wells entered next, his spectacles slipping as he mopped his brow with a handkerchief. He seemed ill at ease, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his jacket. Monsieur le Docteur, Poirot began, you were close to the family. Did Monsieur Charles confide in you about his troubles? Wells cleared his throat. I prescribed him a tonic for nerves. He was under great strain. Debts, family pressures. He mentioned no specific enemies, but he was agitated in recent weeks. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Agitated how? He spoke of betrayal, Wells admitted, his voice low. He wouldn't elaborate. I assumed it was about money. And your whereabouts at 8:45? In my room reading, Wells said quickly, medical journals. I heard nothing until the scream. Clara Denby was the last to be questioned, her youthful face pale as she took her seat. Her hands trembled and she avoided Poirot's gaze, focusing instead on the teapot. Mademoiselle Denby, Poirot said gently, you passed the library at 8:45. Tell me precisely what you saw. Clara swallowed hard. The door was ajar. I heard voices, Charles's and another man's, low and angry. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't want to intrude, so I moved on. Poirot's head tilted. A man's voice. You are certain? Yes, she said, then hesitated. I think so. It was muffled. And where did you go after? To my room, she said quickly. I was there when the scream came. Poirot dismissed her with a nod, his expression thoughtful. As Clara left, Hastings leaned forward. What do you make of it, Poirot? They're all hiding something. Poirot sipped his tisane, his eyes gleaming. Indeed, mon ami. Lady Eleanor speaks of love but conceals her anger. Madame Margaret hides her pain. And perhaps more. The doctor is nervous, his answers too pat. And Mademoiselle Clara hears a voice but fears to name it. The truth lies in these contradictions, Hastings. We must watch, listen, and let the little gray cells work. He rose, adjusting his cuffs. Now let us return to the library. There is more to learn from the scene of the crime. As they left the morning room, the manor seemed to close in around them, its walls whispering of secrets yet to be uncovered. Poirot's calm demeanor was a beacon in the gathering storm, and Hastings felt a familiar certainty. The truth, however well hidden, could not escape Hercule Poirot. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The afternoon sun hung heavy over Blackthorn Manor, its golden light doing little to dispel the chill that had settled over the household. The news of Inspector Grayson's latest discovery buzzed through the corridors like an unwelcome guest. A blood-stained rag had been found in the shed of Tom Riley, the manor's groundskeeper, and the inspector, with his characteristic haste, declared it conclusive evidence. "We've got our man," he announced in the drawing room, his voice brimming with self-assurance. "Riley's been grumbling about unpaid wages for months. Motive, means, and now proof. He'll be in custody by nightfall." Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the window, exchanged a skeptical glance with Hercule Poirot, who sat in a high-backed chair, his small hands folded neatly over his waistcoat. Poirot's green eyes gleamed with something akin to amusement, though his expression remained impassive. "Monsieur l'inspecteur," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "This rag of yours, it is most convenient, non? A killer who leaves such evidence so obligingly is either very foolish or very clever." Grayson bristled, his mustache twitching. "It's blood, Mr. Poirot. Found in Riley's shed, plain as day. What more do you need?" Poirot rose, his movements deliberate, and requested to see the evidence. The rag, produced from a locked box, was indeed stained with blood, but Poirot's keen nose detected another scent. Engine oil, sharp, and unmistakable. Curieux, he murmured, turning the cloth over in his gloved hands. This oil is not found in the library, Inspector. Nor is it likely a groundskeeper working with earth and plants would leave such a mark. This rag, I think, is not what it seems, Hastings nodded, his military mind aligning with Poirot's logic. A plant, then? Someone placed it to point the finger at Riley. Précisément, Poirot replied, his mustache curling slightly. The killer wishes to divert us. But Hercule Poirot is not so easily led astray. Leaving Grayson to mutter about fancy theories, Poirot and Hastings ventured to the garden, where the open library window beckoned. The flower bed beneath was dry, the soil undisturbed, with no trace of footprints or trampled plants. Poirot crouched, his eyes scanning the ground with the precision of a watchmaker. The window was open, yes, but no one entered or exited here, he said. The dust on the sill is untouched, the earth too firm for marks. This is a stage, Hastings, set to mislead. Back in the drawing room, the household's unease was palpable. Lady Eleanor sat with her cane across her lap, her face a mask of controlled grief. Margaret, her eyes red-rimmed, stared vacantly at the fireplace. Dr. Simon Wells sipped tea, his fingers unsteady, while Clara Denby twisted a new strand of pearls, her gaze flickering to the door. Victor Crane paced, his blunt features set in a scowl, while Beatrice sat silently, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Poirot addressed the group, his voice calm but piercing. Mesdames et messieurs, the inspector believes a groundskeeper is responsible, but I, Hercule Poirot, am not convinced. The truth lies closer to home. I ask you to reflect. What did you see, what did you hear at the hour of the crime? The responses were guarded. Victor snapped that he and Beatrice were in the conservatory, a claim Beatrice confirmed with a hesitant nod. Clara repeated her story of passing the library at 8:45, hearing a man's voice but seeing nothing. Dr. Wells insisted he was in his room, though his eyes darted to Margaret, who remained silent. Lady Eleanor, her voice cold, reiterated her time in the study alone. Poirot's gaze lingered on each face, reading the flickers of fear, guilt, or defiance. The rag is a distraction, he said almost to himself, but it tells us something vital. The killer is among us, and they are afraid. As the group dispersed, Hastings leaned close. What now, Poirot? The inspector's got his man, but you're certain it's someone in the house? Poirot's eyes twinkled. The inspector sees only the surface, mon ami. We must dig deeper. The library holds more secrets, and I suspect the desk, those scattered papers, that torn envelope, will speak to us yet. They returned to the library, where the air still carried the faint tang of blood and brandy. Poirot's attention fixed on the desk, his fingers brushing the torn envelope Hastings had noted earlier. This, he said, holding it up, is no mere scrap. It was addressed to Monsieur Charles, and its contents are missing. Why? Because it holds the key to his death. Hastings frowned. But who would take it? And why leave the envelope? Poirot smiled thinly. That, Hastings, is the question. The killer is clever, but not clever enough. They have left threads, and we shall pull them until the tapestry unravels. As the afternoon waned, the manor seemed to close in around them, its grandeur a facade for the secrets it harbored. Poirot's calm certainty was a beacon, but Hastings felt the weight of the task ahead. The killer was close, hiding behind alibis and misdirection, and only Poirot's little gray cells could strip away the lies. Chapter 6. A clue in detail. The morning light filtered through the library's tall windows, casting a soft glow over the scene of Charles Haverford's murder, now cordoned off by Inspector Grayson's orders. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, neat figure a study in concentration. His patent leather shoes gleamed against the Persian rug, which still bore the grim stain of blood, though Charles's body had been removed to the coroner's care. Captain Arthur Hastings hovered nearby. His notebook open, his brow furrowed as he watched Poirot's meticulous inspection. The air was heavy with the scent of old leather and the faint, lingering tang of brandy. Poirot's attention was drawn to the mahogany desk, its surface cluttered with papers, a quill pen, and an inkstand. Among the disarray lay the torn envelope Hastings had noted, its elegant script addressing it to Mr. Charles Haverford. Poirot lifted it with gloved fingers, his green eyes narrowing as he examined the jagged tear. "Mon ami," he said, his voice low, "this envelope is no accident." It contained a note, a summons perhaps, that lured Monsieur Charles to his fate. But where is the note itself? The killer has taken it, yet left this behind. Why? Hastings leaned closer, peering at the envelope. Could it have been lost in the struggle? Poirot shook his head, his mustache twitching. "No, Hastings. The papers are scattered, yes, but not as if by violence. They are arranged to appear disordered. The killer wishes us to believe in chaos, but I, Hercule Poirot, see order beneath it." He turned to the brandy glass, still resting on the desk, its amber contents untouched. Poirot tilted it gently, his nose twitching as he caught a faint scent. "Regardez," he murmured, pointing to a delicate smudge on the rim. A trace of pink lipstick barely visible in the morning light. "This is most curious. Madame Margaret does not wear lipstick, nor does Mademoiselle Clara. Lady Eleanor certainly not. And Madame Beatrice, her lips are unadorned. So who drank from this glass with Monsieur Charles?" Hastings' eyes widened. Another woman? Someone not in the household? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Perhaps. Or perhaps it is a clue placed to mislead. The lipstick is a detail, Hastings, and in details lies the truth. He moved to the open window, inspecting the sill once more. The absence of dust or footprints confirmed his earlier suspicion. No one had entered or exited here. "The window is a fiction," he said, "a prop in the killer's play. But this—" He returned to the desk, retrieving a small, overlooked item. A single pearl, identical to those on Clara Denby's broken necklace, nestled beneath a ledger. Mademoiselle Clara was here or near at the time of the crime. She claims only to have passed by, yet this pearl suggests otherwise. Hastings frowned. But she seemed so shaken, Poirot. Could she be involved? Poirot's gaze was steady. "Everyone is involved, mon ami, until proven otherwise. Mademoiselle Clara hears a man's voice, yet a pearl from her necklace is here. Madame Margaret hides a bruise, the doctor trembles, Monsieur Crane scowls, and Madame Beatrice is too quiet. Each has a secret, and secrets are the threads of this tapestry." Poirot's fingers brushed the torn envelope again, and he paused, his eyes gleaming. "The handwriting," he said softly. "It is refined, precise. Not the hand of a man, I think. This note was written by a woman, and it brought Charles to the library at the fatal hour. We must find its writer." Hastings scribbled in his notebook, his mind racing. "So the note lured Charles, and the lipstick suggests a meeting, possibly romantic? But the letter opener, it's so personal. Whoever did this knew him well." "Précisément," Poirot said, adjusting his cuffs. "The letter opener is not a weapon of chance. It is a symbol, a message. The killer chose it to say something, to Charles, or to us, and the absence of the note tells us they fear its contents. We must learn what it said." As they left the library, Poirot paused by the door, his gaze sweeping the room once more. "This place, Hastings, it speaks. The desk, the glass, the pearl, they are pieces of a puzzle. We shall return to them, but first we must observe the players. Their faces, their gestures, their lies. They will betray the truth." Outside, the manor's gardens were serene, the roses blooming in defiance of the tragedy within. But Hastings felt the weight of unseen eyes, as if the house itself watched their every move. Poirot, undaunted, walked with the calm assurance of a man who knew the truth was within his grasp. "Patience, mon ami," he said, sensing Hastings' unease. "The little gray cells are at work, and they will not rest until the killer is unmasked." Chapter 7. Lies and Motives. The afternoon at Blackthorn Manor was oppressively still, the air thick with the scent of roses from the garden and the undercurrent of suspicion that permeated every room. Hercule Poirot, his black suit as immaculate as ever, conducted his second round of interviews in the morning room, his manner more incisive, his questions sharper. Captain Arthur Hastings sat nearby, his notebook filled with meticulous jottings, though the tangle of alibis and half-truths was beginning to strain even his orderly mind. The household, once bound by polite restraint, was unraveling, their secrets rising to the surface like bubbles in a disturbed pond. Victor Crane was summoned first, his blunt features set in a scowl as he took the chair opposite Poirot. The solicitor's broad shoulders seemed to fill the room, his impatience barely contained. "Monsieur Crane," Poirot began, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "You quarreled with Monsieur Charles over a business deal. Tell me, what was the nature of this dispute?" Victor's jaw tightened. "He cost me thousands," he snapped. "A property venture in London. Charles promised profits, but it collapsed. He was reckless, throwing money at schemes without a thought. I told him he'd ruined me, but murder? I'm no killer." Poirot's green eyes gleamed. "And yet, monsieur, your alibi is uncertain. You claim you were in the conservatory with your wife at 8:45, but Madame Beatrice was less certain when I spoke to her. Where were you truly?" Victor flushed, his hands clenching. "I was with Beatrice. She's nervous, that's all. She gets things muddled." Poirot made a small, non-committal sound, his gaze unwavering. "We shall see, monsieur. The truth has a way of clarifying itself." Beatrice Crane was next, her quiet demeanor a stark contrast to her husband's bluster. She sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting an interruption. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "you were in the conservatory with your husband, oui? But you hesitated when I asked before. Tell me, what did you see or hear at 8:45? Beatrice's lips parted, then closed. I was alone for a few minutes," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Victor stepped out to fetch a cigar. "I stayed in the conservatory, looking at the roses. I heard nothing, I swear." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but probing. "And when did Monsieur Victor return?" "Before 9, she said quickly, "just before the scream." Hastings scribbled furiously, noting the discrepancy. Victor's alibi was crumbling, and Beatrice's nervousness suggested more than mere confusion. Lady Eleanor followed, her regal bearing undiminished by the strain of the past days. She leaned on her cane, her eyes sharp as she faced Poirot. "Madame," he said, "you spoke of Charles's debts. But there is more, I think. A secret, perhaps, about the estate." Lady Eleanor's lips thinned. "You are perceptive, Monsieur Poirot." "Very well. Charles was cut from my will last month. His recklessness threatened Blackthorn's future. I named Clara my heir instead. She is sensible, loyal. Charles was furious when I told him, but he had no right to complain." Poirot's mustache twitched. "And when did you inform him of this change?" 2 weeks ago, she said, her voice cold. He argued, pleaded, but my decision was final. Clara Denby was summoned next, her youthful face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a handkerchief. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm, "you heard a man's voice in the library at 8:45? You are certain it was a man?" Clara nodded, then hesitated. I think so. It was low, angry. I heard Charles say, "You'll regret this." I didn't stay to listen. I was frightened. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And this voice, did it sound like Monsieur Victor? Or perhaps Dr. Wells? I couldn't tell, she whispered, her eyes darting away. It was muffled. I don't know. Hastings caught Poirot's glance, sensing the detective's suspicion. Clara was holding back, her fear palpable. But why? Dr. Simon Wells was the last, his spectacles slipping as he mopped his brow. Docteur, Poirot said, you prescribed Monsieur Charles a tonic. But was there more? Something stronger, perhaps? Wells's hands shook, his voice unsteady. I prescribed morphine for insomnia. He was desperate, unable to sleep. He begged for something stronger, but I was careful. I swear I didn't harm him. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And this morphine, where is it kept? In my medical bag in my room, Wells said. It's locked always. And at 8:45 you were reading, oui? Yet Mademoiselle Clara heard a man's voice in the library. Could it have been yours? Wells paled. No, I was in my room. I had no reason to harm Charles. Poirot dismissed him, his expression thoughtful. As Wells left, Hastings leaned close. They're all lying, aren't they? Or at least hiding something. Oui, mon ami, Poirot said, sipping his tisane. Victor's anger, Beatrice's fear, Lady Eleanor's will, Clara's hesitation, Wells's morphine. These are not mere threads, they are ropes, pulling us toward the truth. But we must be patient. The killer believes they have outwitted us, but they have left traces. The envelope, the pearl, the lipstick. These will speak. As they stepped into the hall, the manor's silence felt oppressive, its grandeur a mask for the motives simmering beneath. Poirot's calm certainty was unshaken, but Hastings felt the weight of the lies closing in. The killer was near, their secrets unraveling, and Poirot's little gray cells were poised to strike. Chapter 8. The Emotional Breaking Point. The morning room of Blackthorn Manor, with its soft light and delicate furnishings, seemed to mock the raw tension that gripped the household. Hercule Poirot sat at the small table, his tisane cooling untouched, his green eyes sharp as he prepared for another round of interviews. The air was thick with unspoken fears, and the cracks in the household's carefully maintained facade were beginning to show. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated nearby with his notebook, sensed a shift. The strain of the past days was pushing someone toward breaking, and Poirot, with his unerring instinct, was ready to exploit it. Margaret Haverford was summoned first, her delicate frame trembling as she entered. Her auburn hair was disheveled, her eyes red from sleepless nights, and the bruise on her wrist, though faded, was still visible beneath her sleeve. Poirot's voice was gentle, almost paternal, but his gaze was unrelenting. "Madame Margaret," he said, "you have suffered greatly, but the truth cannot be hidden forever. Tell me, what was the true nature of your marriage to Monsieur Charles?" Margaret's hands twisted her handkerchief into knots, her lips quivering. I loved him, she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. "Madame, you hide something. A bruise on your wrist, letters your husband wrote in secret, a distance between you. Speak, I beg you, the truth will set you free." Her composure shattered like glass. Tears streamed down her face as she collapsed into the chair, her voice breaking. "It was Dr. Wells," she sobbed. I had an affair with Simon. Charles found out. He was furious, threatened to ruin us both, to tell everyone. I begged him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. He said he'd make sure Simon lost his practice, that I'd be shamed. I didn't know what to do. Hastings' pen froze, his eyes wide. Poirot's expression remained calm, though his mustache twitched with satisfaction. "And when did Charles discover this, madam?" 2 weeks ago. she said, her voice barely audible. He found a letter Simon wrote to me. He locked it in his desk, said he'd use it if I didn't obey him. And at 8:45 on the night of the murder, Poirot pressed. I was in my room, she insisted, her sobs subsiding into a desperate whisper. I swear it. I was too afraid to face him. Poirot nodded, dismissing her gently. As she left, Hastings whispered, Good Lord, Poirot. An affair with Wells? That gives them both a motive. Oui, mon ami, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. But motives are like shadows. Many cast them, but only one holds the knife. We must probe further. Clara Denby was next, her youthful face pale, her hands trembling as she sat. Poirot's tone was softer, coaxing. Mademoiselle Clara, you heard a man's voice in the library, yet you hesitate to name it. Why? What do you fear? Clara's eyes darted to the door, her voice a whisper. I lied, Monsieur Poirot. I didn't just pass the library, I saw someone, Victor Crane, near the door at 8:50. He looked frightened, like he'd seen something terrible. I didn't say before because I was afraid of him. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And this was after the voices you heard? Yes, she said, her voice breaking. I heard Charles arguing, then saw Victor. I ran to my room. I didn't want to get involved. Hastings scribbled furiously, his mind racing. Victor's alibi was already shaky, and now Clara placed him at the scene. But Poirot's expression was thoughtful, not triumphant. Merci, mademoiselle, he said. Your courage serves the truth. As Clara left, Poirot turned to Hastings. The affair, the sighting of Monsieur Crane, these are pieces, Hastings, but not the whole. Madame Margaret's confession reveals her fear, but not her guilt. Mademoiselle Clara's admission places Monsieur Victor near the crime, but fear is not proof. We must look to the details, the envelope, the pearl, the lipstick. They will guide us that afternoon. Poirot paced the garden, his small figure dwarfed by the towering roses. Hastings followed, sensing the detective's mind at work. What next, Poirot? Margaret's affair, Clara's sighting. They're damning, but they don't solve the murder. Poirot paused, his fingers brushing a rose petal. The heart, Hastings, is where the truth lies. Madame Margaret breaks, Mademoiselle Clara confesses, but the killer remains hidden. They are close, mon ami, and they feel the net tightening. We must watch their eyes, their hands, their silences. The next move is ours. The manor loomed behind them, its windows like eyes watching their every step. The emotional cracks in the household were widening, and Poirot, with his little gray cells, was ready to peer into the abyss. Chapter 9. The trap is set. The drawing-room of Blackthorn Manor was steeped in an uneasy hush, the flickering firelight casting long shadows across the faces of its occupants. The grandeur of the room, its velvet drapes, polished mahogany, and crystal chandelier seemed to mock the tension that gripped the household. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his small, immaculate figure commanding the space, his green eyes gleaming with purpose. Captain Arthur Hastings stood by the fireplace, his notebook tucked away, his senses alert to the drama about to unfold. The household had been summoned, and they sat in a tense semicircle. Lady Eleanor, her cane gripped tightly. Margaret, her eyes downcast. Dr. Simon Wells fidgeting with his spectacles. Clara Denby clutching a new strand of pearls. And Victor and Beatrice Crane, their faces a study in contrasting emotions, his defiant, hers fearful. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and measured. The time has come to confront the truth. The murder of Monsieur Charles Haverford was no act of a passing thief, nor a crime of passion alone. It was a calculated act, woven with deception, and the killer sits among us. Tonight I, Hercule Poirot, shall lay a trap for the truth. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Margaret's hands trembled, Clara's pearls clicked softly, and Victor's scowl deepened. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze sweeping over each face. "Let us review the facts." At 8:30 p.m., Madame Eleanor spoke with her son in the hall. At 8:45, Mademoiselle Clara passed the library, hearing an angry voice. At 9 o'clock, a scream announced the discovery of Monsieur Charles, dead by a letter opener. The window was open, yet no footprints marked the garden. The desk was scattered with papers, a torn envelope among them. A pearl from Mademoiselle Clara's necklace lay nearby, and a glass of brandy bore a trace of lipstick. "These are not accidents. They are the threads of a tapestry." He paused, holding up the torn envelope, its elegant script catching the firelight. This envelope contained a note, a summons that brought Monsieur Charles to the library. Who wrote it, and why was it taken? Beatrice Crane's face paled, her hands twisting in her lap. Poirot's eyes lingered on her, but he continued. "Madame Margaret, you confessed to an affair with Dr. Wells. Monsieur Charles knew and threatened to expose you. A motive, perhaps?" Margaret gasped, her eyes filling with tears, but she said nothing. "Dr. Wells," Poirot continued, turning to the physician, "you prescribed morphine to a desperate man. Was it only for insomnia, or did you fear his threats?" Wells's spectacles slipped, his voice a stammer. "I told you I didn't harm him." Poirot's gaze shifted to Clara. "Mademoiselle Clara, you saw Monsieur Victor near the library at 8:50, looking frightened, yet you hesitated to speak. Why?" Clara's lips parted, but no sound came, her eyes darting to Victor. Victor surged to his feet, his voice a growl. "This is absurd. I was in the conservatory with Beatrice. Clara's mistaken or lying." Beatrice's head snapped up, her voice trembling. "Victor, please." Her words faltered, and Poirot seized the moment, his tone soft but piercing. "Madame Beatrice, you have something to say. The note, the lipstick, your hands tremble when I speak of them. Why?" Beatrice's eyes widened, her breath catching. I didn't." She stopped, her gaze dropping to her lap, her silence louder than words. Poirot turned to the group, his voice rising. "The killer believes they have outwitted us, but they have left traces. The note lured Monsieur Charles to his death. The lipstick suggests a meeting, intimate perhaps. The pearl places Mademoiselle Clara near the scene, and Monsieur Victor, your alibi crumbles under scrutiny. Someone in this room knows the truth, and I shall not rest until it is revealed." Lady Eleanor's cane tapped sharply on the floor. "Monsieur Poirot, this is intolerable. Accusing us all, where is your proof?" Poirot's smile was thin, his eyes unyielding. "The proof, madame, is in the contradictions. The alibis that shift, the glances that betray. The killer is nervous, and they will make a mistake. I am watching." The room fell silent, the fire crackling as the only sound. Hastings watched the faces, Margaret's tears, Wells's unease, Clara's fear, Victor's anger, Beatrice's pallor, Lady Eleanor's icy control. Poirot had cast his net, and the tension was palpable, each suspect teetering on the edge of revelation or defiance. As the group dispersed, Poirot murmured to Hastings, "The trap is set, mon ami. The killer feels the pressure, and they will act. We must be ready outside." The night was dark, the manor's windows reflecting the firelight like eyes guarding their secrets. Hastings felt the weight of the moment, but Poirot's calm certainty was unshaken. The truth was close, and the little gray cells were poised to strike. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The drawing room of Blackthorn Manor was a stage set for revelation, its heavy drapes drawn against the night, the firelight casting flickering shadows across the faces of the assembled household. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his small, immaculate figure radiating authority, his green eyes gleaming with the certainty of truth uncovered. Captain Arthur Hastings stood by the door, his heart pounding, sensing the climax of Poirot's meticulous work. The suspects sat in a tense semicircle. Lady Eleanor, her cane gripped like a scepter. Margaret, her face pale with dread. Dr. Simon Wells, his spectacles glinting nervously. Clara Denby clutching her pearls. And Victor and Beatrice Crane, their expressions a contrast of defiance and fear. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice steady and resonant. The murder of Monsieur Charles Haverford was a crime of precision, not passion. The killer sought to deceive us with an open window, a scattered desk, a blood-stained rag in the groundskeeper's shed. But I, Hercule Poirot, see through such artifices. The truth lies in the details, the torn envelope, the pearl, the lipstick, the contradictions in your stories. Tonight I shall reveal the killer. A collective intake of breath filled the room. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Let us reconstruct. At 8:30 p.m., Madame Eleanor spoke with Charles in the hall. At 8:45, Mademoiselle Clara heard an angry voice in the library. At 8:50, she saw Monsieur Victor nearby, looking frightened. At 9 o'clock, the scream announced Charles' death by a letter opener. The window was open, yet no one entered or exited. The desk held a torn envelope addressed to Charles, its note missing. A pearl from Mademoiselle Clara's necklace lay nearby, and a brandy glass bore a trace of lipstick. These are not random. They are the killer's mistakes. He held up the envelope, its elegant script catching the firelight. This note lured Charles to the library. Its handwriting is refined, feminine. It said, "Meet me at 8:45. We must end this." Who wrote it, and why was it taken? Poirot turned to Beatrice Crane, whose face had gone deathly pale. Madame Beatrice, your hands tremble when I speak of the note. You wrote it, did you not? You lured Charles to the library knowing he would come. Beatrice gasped, her voice a whisper. No, I didn't. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. You did, madame. The ink matches the pen in your room found by my discreet inquiries. But you did not act alone. Monsieur Victor, your husband, struck the fatal blow. Why? Because Charles discovered your scheme to defraud the Haverford estate. Victor surged to his feet, his face red with fury. This is preposterous! You have no proof! Poirot's smile was thin. Oh, but I do, monsieur. Charles was cut from his mother's will, leaving the estate to Mademoiselle Clara. You and Madame Beatrice planned to forge documents to sell Blackthorn Manor, pocketing the profits. Charles found your plans, hidden in his desk, among those scattered papers. He confronted you, threatened to expose you. So, you acted. Madame Beatrice wrote the note, luring him to the library. You, Monsieur Victor, waited there. And when he arrived, you stabbed him with the letter opener, a weapon chosen to suggest impulse, not calculation. Beatrice sobbed, her hands covering her face. Victor's defiance faltered, his eyes darting to his wife. Poirot continued, his voice cutting through the silence. The lipstick on the glass was a clever touch, Madame Beatrice. You applied it to suggest a romantic meeting, to mislead us. But you forgot to wipe the glass clean. The police will find your fingerprints. And the pearl, Mademoiselle Clara? It fell when you lingered near the library, hearing the argument, too afraid to intervene. Clara's eyes widened, but she remained silent. Margaret's tears fell anew, and Dr. Wells mopped his brow, his relief palpable. Lady Eleanor's face was a mask of stone, her cane unmoving. Poirot turned to Inspector Grayson, who stood by the door, his earlier certainty replaced by grudging respect. Inspector, you will find the forged documents in Monsieur Victor's briefcase hidden in his room. The note, I suspect, was burned, but the envelope betrays its writer. Arrest Monsieur and Madame Crane." Victor lunged forward, but Grayson's constables were swift, restraining him. Beatrice collapsed, sobbing as handcuffs clicked shut. The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fire and Margaret's quiet weeping. Poirot's voice softened, addressing the household. "The heart of man is complex, but it cannot hide from the truth. Monsieur Charles died because he stood in the way of greed. The little gray cells, they see what others miss. As the Cranes were led away, the manor seemed to exhale, its secrets laid bare." Hastings looked at Poirot, marveling at the clarity of his logic. The puzzle was solved, but the weight of the truth lingered, heavy as the Devonshire night. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The morning sun bathed Blackthorn Manor in a gentle light, its rays filtering through the mist that clung to the Devonshire hills. The grandeur of the estate seemed subdued, as if the house itself mourned the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. Hercule Poirot sat in the morning room, his small, immaculate figure framed by the window, a cup of tisane cradled in his hands. The steam rose in delicate curls, much like the thoughts that swirled in his mind. Captain Arthur Hastings stood nearby, his suitcase packed, his notebook closed, his expression a mixture of awe and melancholy. The case was solved, the killers apprehended, yet the air carried the weight of lingering questions. Questions not of fact, but of the human heart. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft but resonant, "you look troubled. The puzzle is complete, the truth revealed. Yet you are not at ease. Why?" Hastings sighed, settling into a chair opposite Poirot. "It's just the waste of it all, Poirot. Charles dead, Victor and Beatrice facing justice, the family torn apart, all for greed. I can't help but wonder if there was another way." Poirot's green eyes gleamed with a quiet wisdom. "The human heart, Hastings, is a labyrinth. Some choose paths of honor, others of avarice. Monsieur Victor and Madame Beatrice chose poorly, and their choice led to murder. But you must not grieve for what might have been. The truth once uncovered brings order, even if it cannot bring peace." Hastings nodded, though his brow remained furrowed. "You saw it all so clearly, the envelope, the lipstick, the pearl. How do you do it, Poirot? How do you see what the rest of us miss?" Poirot sipped his tisane, his mustache curling slightly. "It is the little gray cells, mon ami. They observe, they analyze, they connect." The envelope was not merely torn, it was torn by a hand that feared its contents. The lipstick was not a mistake, but a deliberate misdirection, betraying Madame Beatrice's attempt to deceive. The pearl placed Mademoiselle Clara near the crime, not as a killer, but as a witness too frightened to speak. Each detail, Hastings, is a word in the story of the crime. I simply read the story. He set his cup down, his movements precise. But it is not enough to see the details. One must understand the heart, the motives, the fears, the desires. Monsieur Victor's greed, Madame Beatrice's complicity, Madame Margaret's shame, Mademoiselle Clara's fear, Dr. Wells's secrets. They all spoke to me, and I listened. Hastings shook his head, a faint smile breaking through. "You never cease to amaze, old chap. But what of Lady Eleanor? She's lost her son, her estate's future is uncertain. How does she go on?" Poirot's expression softened, a rare glimpse of empathy in his otherwise methodical demeanor. "Madame Eleanor is strong, Hastings. She will endure as she always has. The estate may falter, but her will does not, and Mademoiselle Clara, her heir, will learn from this tragedy. Life continues. Even after death, the butler appeared, announcing that the car was ready to take them to the station. Poirot rose, adjusting his hat with a practiced flourish. "Come, mon ami. London awaits, and with it new puzzles. The world is never short of mysteries for Hercule Poirot." As they stepped into the hall, Lady Eleanor emerged from her study, her cane tapping softly. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice steady despite the shadows in her eyes, you have brought us justice. I thank you, though the cost is heavy. Poirot bowed slightly. Madame, justice is my duty. I regret the pain it brings, but the truth must always be served. She nodded, a flicker of respect in her gaze, and turned away. Hastings followed Poirot to the waiting car, the manor receding behind them as the gravel crunched underfoot. The Devonshire mist was lifting, revealing the rolling hills beyond, but the weight of Blackthorn's secrets lingered in Hastings' mind. As the train carried them toward London, Poirot gazed out the window, his expression serene. The little grey cells, Hastings, he murmured almost to himself. They never fail. And in their work we find not only truth, but the order of the world. Hastings smiled, leaning back in his seat. The case was closed, the truth laid bare, and with Poirot at his side, he felt ready for whatever mysteries lay ahead. Blackthorn Manor faded into the distance, its story complete, its shadows dispelled by the brilliance of Poirot's mind. Chapter 12. Shadows of Doubt. The afternoon at Blackthorn Manor was cloaked in a heavy stillness, as if the house itself were recovering from the storm of Poirot's revelations. The arrest of Victor and Beatrice Crane had lifted the veil of suspicion, yet an undercurrent of unease lingered among the remaining inhabitants. Hercule Poirot, ever meticulous, had chosen to delay his departure for London, sensing that the tapestry of the crime was not yet fully unraveled. Captain Arthur Hastings, his suitcase still packed, followed Poirot back to the morning room, where a fresh pot of tisane awaited. The detective's green eyes were thoughtful, his mustache twitching as he sipped the steaming brew. Mon ami, Poirot said, setting his cup down with precision. You believe the case is closed, oui? The Cranes are in custody, the motive revealed. Yet I, Hercule Poirot, am not entirely satisfied. There is a shadow, a small discord in the harmony of our solution. Hastings frowned, settling into a chair. A discord? Poirot, you've got the note, the lipstick, the forged documents. Victor and Beatrice are guilty. What's left to doubt? Poirot's fingers drummed lightly on the table. The little grey cells, Hastings, they whisper of something overlooked. The pearl, for instance. Why was it found beneath the ledger? Mademoiselle Clara's necklace broke in the drawing room, not the library. And Madame Margaret's bruise, her affair with Dr. Wells, was revealed, but her fear seemed deeper than shame alone. These are not mere details, they are echoes of a truth we have not fully grasped. Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. You think there's more to the story? Another accomplice, perhaps? Perhaps, Poirot said, his voice low. Or perhaps a motive we have not yet seen. Let us revisit the players, mon ami. The truth often hides in the silences. Poirot requested a private audience with Clara Denby, who entered the morning room with visible trepidation. Her youthful face was pale, her new strand of pearls clutched tightly in her hand. Mademoiselle Clara, Poirot began, his tone gentle but probing. You saw Monsieur Victor near the library at 8:50 looking frightened. But the pearl found in the library, how did it come to be there if your necklace broke later? Clara's eyes widened, her voice trembling. I don't know, Monsieur Poirot. I swear I only passed the library. I didn't go in. Perhaps it fell earlier and I didn't notice. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And the voice you heard, angry, male. You said it was muffled, but was there anything familiar in its tone? Think carefully. Mademoiselle Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting the pearls. It might have been Dr. Wells, she whispered. I wasn't sure before, but the way he speaks, his cadence, it sounded like him. Poirot nodded, dismissing her gently. As she left, Hastings whispered, Wells, but he was in his room reading. And Margaret's affair already gives him a motive. Do you think he was involved? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Possibly, mon ami. But we must also consider Madame Margaret, her bruise, her fear. It suggests more than an affair. Let us speak with her. Margaret Haverford entered, her delicate frame trembling, her eyes darting nervously. Poirot's voice was soft, almost soothing. Madam, you confessed to an affair with Dr. Wells and to Charles's threats. But there is more, is there not? The bruise on your wrist, how did it come to be? Margaret's hand instinctively covered her wrist, her voice barely audible. Charles. He was angry when he found out about Simon. He grabbed me hard the night before he died. He said I'd ruined everything, that I'd cost him the estate. Poirot leaned forward. And did he say why the estate was so important? Beyond money, perhaps? Margaret's tears welled up. He said he'd made a deal to save it, but I'd jeopardized it. He wouldn't tell me more. Poirot dismissed her, his expression thoughtful. Turning to Hastings, he said, "A deal, mon ami." This is new. Charles was desperate to save the estate, yet Lady Eleanor cut him from her will. What deal did he make, and with whom? Hastings frowned. Could it involve Wells? Clara's hint about his voice in the library? Oui, Poirot said, rising. Let us examine Dr. Wells's room, his medical bag, his papers. They may speak where he does not. They found Wells's room orderly, his medical bag locked as he'd claimed. With the butler's assistance, Poirot obtained a key and opened it, revealing vials of morphine in a small notebook. Flipping through it, Poirot paused at an entry dated a week before the murder. CH demands payment for silence, threatens exposure. Must act. Hastings' eyes widened. Good Lord, Poirot. Wells was being blackmailed by Charles. Poirot's mustache twitched. It seems so, mon ami. Dr. Wells had a secret and Charles knew it. But was it enough to make him a killer or merely a pawn in another's game? As they left the room, the manor's silence felt heavier, its shadows deeper. Poirot's doubt had cast new light on the case, and Hastings sensed the truth was not yet fully revealed. The little gray cells were at work, and Blackthorn Manor's secrets were far from exhausted. Chapter 13. The Hidden Thread. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Blackthorn Manor, its golden rays doing little to warm the chill of suspicion that lingered in the air. Hercule Poirot, his black suit as pristine as ever, paced the library where Charles Haverford had met his end. The room, though tidied by the police, still held an echo of violence. The Persian rug bore a faint stain, and the mahogany desk stood as a silent witness to the crime. Captain Arthur Hastings followed closely, his mind grappling with Poirot's unsettling doubts. The arrest of Victor and Beatrice Crane had seemed the final piece of the puzzle. Yet Poirot's insistence on a shadow of discord suggested the truth was more complex. Mon ami, Poirot said, pausing by the desk, his green eyes scanning its surface. The Cranes are guilty, oui, but the tapestry is not complete. The note in Dr. Wells's bag, CH demands payment for silence. It points to blackmail. Charles was not merely a victim of greed. He was a player in a deeper game. We must find the thread that connects Wells, the Cranes, and this mysterious deal Madame Margaret spoke of. Hastings frowned, his notebook open but idle. Oh, blackmail. You think Charles was extorting Wells, and that's why he was killed? But the Cranes' motive, forging documents to sell the estate, fits perfectly. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing on his lips. Perfection, Hastings, is often a disguise for deception. The Cranes' plan explains the murder, but not the pearl, not Madame Margaret's fear, not Wells's trembling hands. Let us examine the desk once more. The missing note. It haunts me. Poirot's gloved fingers sifted through the papers now neatly stacked by the police. Beneath a ledger he found a small overlooked item, a crumpled receipt dated 2 weeks prior for a jeweler in Exeter. It listed a repair for a pearl necklace restringing. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Curieux. Mademoiselle Clara's necklace broke in the drawing room, yet a pearl was found here. This receipt suggests her necklace was repaired recently. Did it break again, or was the pearl placed deliberately? Hastings' brow furrowed. Placed. By whom? Clara? Perhaps, Poirot said, tucking the receipt into his pocket. Or by someone wishing to cast suspicion on her. We must speak with Dr. Wells. His notebook suggests a secret Charles held over him. Let us see if he will break. Dr. Simon Wells was summoned to the morning room. His face pale behind his spectacles, his hands unsteady as he sat. Poirot's tone was calm but relentless. Docteur, your notebook reveals that Monsieur Charles demanded payment for silence. What did he know? Speak, or the truth will find you less kindly. Wells's shoulders slumped, his voice a hoarse whisper. Charles, he discovered I'd been falsifying prescriptions. Not for profit, I swear. Morphine for a patient, a friend who couldn't afford treatment. Charles threatened to report me to the medical board unless I paid him. I gave him what I could, but he wanted more. I didn't kill him, Monsieur Poirot. I couldn't. Poirot's gaze was piercing. And at 8:45, Doctor, you were in your room reading, Yet Mademoiselle Clara believes she heard your voice in the library. Wells's eyes widened, his hands trembling. I wasn't there. I swear it. I was in my room. Clara must be mistaken. Poirot dismissed him, his expression thoughtful. As Wells left, Hastings whispered, He's terrified, Poirot. Do you believe him? He speaks part of the truth, Poirot said, but fear makes men lie. The blackmail gives him motive, yet the Crane's guilt is certain. There is a connection we have missed, a thread tying Wells, the Cranes, and perhaps another. Poirot requested Lady Eleanor's presence next. She entered, her cane tapping sharply, her gray eyes meeting Poirot's with defiance. Madame, Poirot said, you cut Charles from your will, naming Mademoiselle Clara your heir. Did Charles know of this before his death? Lady Eleanor's lips thinned. Yes. I told him 2 weeks ago. He was furious, said he'd made arrangements to save the estate. He wouldn't say how, only that I'd regret my decision. Poirot leaned forward. And these arrangements, could they involve Dr. Wells or perhaps Monsieur Victor? Lady Eleanor hesitated, her cane tightening in her grip. Charles mentioned Victor once, said he was useful. I thought it was another of his schemes. I didn't ask further. As she left, Poirot turned to Hastings. A deal with Victor, blackmail of Wells, a pearl in the library. These are not separate threads, mon ami, but part of a single weave. We must find the note's contents, or its ghost will elude us. The manor's silence was oppressive, its walls seeming to close in as the day waned. Hastings felt the weight of Poirot's doubts, the sense that the truth was slipping through their fingers. But Poirot's calm was unshaken, his little gray cells spinning a web to catch the final secret Blackthorn Manor held. Chapter 14. The Final Pieces. The twilight cast a somber glow over Blackthorn Manor, its ivy-clad walls absorbing the fading light as if guarding their secrets more fiercely. Hercule Poirot stood in the library, his small figure silhouetted against the tall windows, his hands clasped behind his back. The room, though tidied, still bore the invisible scars of Charles Haverford's murder. The faint stain on the rug, the desk with its scattered papers, the lingering scent of brandy. Captain Arthur Hastings watched from the doorway, his notebook heavy with the weight of unanswered questions. Poirot's insistence on a hidden thread had stirred unease, and now, as the day waned, the detective seemed poised to unravel the final knot. Mon ami, Poirot said, his voice low but resonant, The Cranes are guilty, oui, but the puzzle is incomplete. The pearl, the blackmail, Madame Margaret's fear, these are not mere echoes, but pieces of a larger truth. We must find the note or its shadow to see the whole. Hastings frowned, his mind racing. The note's gone, Poirot. Burned, you said. How can we know what it said? Poirot's mustache twitched, a gleam in his green eyes. The note is gone, but its purpose remains. It lured Charles to his death, written in a feminine hand. Madame Beatrice admitted to writing it, but I suspect another hand guided her. Let us search her room. There may be traces yet. With the butler's reluctant permission, Poirot and Hastings entered the Cranes' guest suite. Beatrice's belongings were sparse, her nervous disposition reflected in the neatly folded clothes and a small writing desk. Poirot's gloved fingers sifted through her papers, pausing at a leather-bound diary. Its pages were filled with terse entries, but one dated the day before the murder caught his eye. V insists we act. C knows too much. I wrote the note as he asked, but my heart misgives me. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Voila, Hastings. Madame Beatrice wrote the note at Victor's bidding, but her fear suggests coercion. There is more here. Someone else pulled the strings. Hastings' brow furrowed. Someone else? But who? Wells? He was being blackmailed, and Clara heard his voice. Poirot nodded, tucking the diary into his pocket. Oui, Dr. Wells is a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole. Let us confront him one final time. Dr. Simon Wells was summoned to the morning room, his face ashen, his spectacles slipping as he sat. Poirot's tone was sharp, his gaze unrelenting. Doctor, you admitted Charles blackmailed you over falsified prescriptions, but there is more, is there not? Mademoiselle Clara heard your voice in the library at 8:45. Why were you there? Wells's hands shook, his voice a desperate whisper. I was there, yes. Charles demanded more money that night. I went to the library to plead with him, to beg him to stop. He laughed, said I'd pay until he was done with me. I left him alive, I swear. I heard someone else enter as I left. Victor, I think. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And this other person, did you see them? No, Wells said, mopping his brow. I heard footsteps, heavy ones. I ran to my room, terrified. Poirot dismissed him, turning to Hastings. The footsteps, mon ami. Victor's perhaps, but there is another possibility. The pearl, Mademoiselle Clara's presence in the library is unexplained. Let us speak with her. Clara Denby entered, her youthful face drawn, her pearls clutched tightly. Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. Mademoiselle, the pearl in the library. Your necklace was repaired recently, yet a pearl was found. Did you enter the library that night? Clara's eyes filled with tears. I did, she whispered. I went to speak with Charles after hearing him argue with Dr. Wells. I wanted to beg him to stop his schemes, to save Aunt Eleanor's heart. He was cruel, said I'd get nothing if I crossed him. I left before 8:50, but my necklace caught on the doorframe. A pearl must have fallen, then Poirot's gaze softened. And you saw Monsieur Victor? Yes, she said, her voice breaking. He was coming down the hall as I left. He looked wild, like he was about to do something terrible. Poirot nodded, dismissing her gently. As she left, he turned to Hastings. The pieces align, mon ami. Charles blackmailed Wells, threatened Clara, and uncovered the Cranes' forgery. But there is one final thread. Lady Eleanor. She knew of Charles's deal. We must learn what it was. Lady Eleanor received them in her study, her gray eyes sharp despite her grief. Madame, Poirot said, Charles spoke of a deal to save the estate. What did he mean? Her cane tapped sharply. He said he'd secured a buyer for part of the land through Victor. I told him it was madness. The estate must remain whole. He wouldn't listen. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And this buyer, who was it? I don't know, she said, her voice cold. Charles kept it secret even from me. As they left the study, Poirot murmured, "The deal was with Victor, mon ami, but it was a ruse. The forgery. Charles was complicit, then turned against them. That is why he died." The manor's shadows deepened, but Poirot's clarity was a beacon. The truth was near, and Hastings felt the net tightening around the final secret. Chapter 15. The Final Truth. The morning room of Blackthorn Manor was bathed in a pale light, the mist outside clinging to the windows like a shroud. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his small, immaculate figure radiating an air of quiet triumph. His patent leather shoes gleamed, his mustache was perfectly waxed, and his green eyes sparkled with the clarity of a mind that had pieced together the final fragments of a complex puzzle. Captain Arthur Hastings stood by the fireplace, his notebook closed, his heart pounding with anticipation. The household had been summoned one last time. Lady Eleanor, her face a mask of stoic grief. Margaret, her eyes red but resolute. Dr. Simon Wells fidgeting nervously, and Clara Denby clutching her pearls with trembling hands. Victor and Beatrice Crane were absent, confined in police custody, but their shadows loomed over the gathering. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice resonant and deliberate, "the murder of Monsieur Charles Haverford was a tapestry of greed, fear, and betrayal. I, Hercule Poirot, have unraveled its threads, and today the final truth shall be revealed. The Cranes are guilty, oui. But there is one more piece, a secret that binds this crime together." A murmur of unease rippled through the room. Lady Eleanor's cane tapped once sharply against the floor. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us revisit the crime." At 8:30 p.m., Madame Eleanor spoke with Charles. At 8:45, Mademoiselle Clara heard an argument in the library. Dr. Wells's voice, she now believes. At 8:50, she saw Monsieur Victor near the library, looking frightened. At 9 o'clock, the scream announced Charles's death by a letter opener. The open window was a deception, the blood-stained rag a distraction, the pearl a clue to Clara's presence. But the heart of the crime lies in the torn envelope and the missing note. He held up the envelope, its elegant script catching the light. "Madame Beatrice wrote this note at Monsieur Victor's bidding. Meet me at 8:45. We must end this." It lured Charles to the library where Victor stabbed him to protect their scheme to forge documents and sell Blackthorn Manor. But why did Charles agree to meet? Because he was part of their plan until he betrayed them. Poirot turned to Lady Eleanor, his gaze piercing. "Madame, you said Charles spoke of a deal to save the estate through Monsieur Victor. This was no legitimate sale. It was the Cranes' forgery, and Charles was complicit. He provided them with estate documents, believing he would profit. But when you cut him from your will, naming Mademoiselle Clara your heir, he panicked. He threatened to expose the Cranes unless they paid him more. This was his fatal mistake." Lady Eleanor's lips tightened, but she remained silent. Poirot continued, turning to Dr. Wells. "Docteur, Charles also blackmailed you over falsified prescriptions. You were in the library at 8:45, pleading with him to stop. You left him alive, but your presence made you a convenient suspect. Mademoiselle Clara heard your voice, and the killer used this to their advantage." Wells mopped his brow, his voice a whisper. "I told you I didn't kill him." "Non, you did not," Poirot said, his tone softening. "But you carried a secret, and secrets are the currency of murder." Poirot's gaze shifted to Clara. "Mademoiselle, your pearl was found in the library because you entered, not merely passed by. You confronted Charles about his schemes, fearing for Madame Eleanor's legacy. Your necklace caught on the doorframe, leaving a pearl behind. You saw Monsieur Victor approach, and you fled, terrified." Clara's tears fell, her voice barely audible. "I only wanted to protect Aunt Eleanor." Charles was destroying everything. Poirot nodded, then addressed the room. The final piece is this. The Crane's plan was not born in isolation. Monsieur Victor needed an insider, someone with access to the estate's secrets. Charles provided this, but there was another, a silent partner who knew of the forgery and did nothing to stop it. He turned to Lady Eleanor, his voice steady but relentless. "Madam, you suspected Charles's deal with Victor. You knew he was desperate to save the estate, even by dishonest means. You did not act because you believed it might preserve Blackthorn's legacy. But when Charles turned on the Cranes, threatening exposure, they killed him to protect their scheme and your silence." Lady Eleanor's cane trembled, her eyes flashing with defiance. "You accuse me of complicity, Monsieur Poirot?" "I loved my son despite his faults." "Oui, madame," Poirot said gently. "You loved him, but you let greed blind you. Your silence enabled the crime, though you did not wield the knife." The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling like dust. Margaret sobbed quietly, Wells stared at the floor, and Clara clutched her pearls. Lady Eleanor rose, her cane steady now, and left without a word. Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression serene. "The truth is complete, mon ami. The Cranes killed for greed, Charles for betrayal, and Madame Eleanor for a legacy she could not save. The little grey cells have spoken." As they prepared to leave for London, Hastings felt the Manor's shadows lift, its secrets laid bare. Poirot's brilliance had triumphed, but the cost was a family fractured beyond repair. The train awaited, and with it the promise of new mysteries. But for now, Blackthorn Manor's story was told.